Hi, I'm James from Chaosium. I sat down with Lynne Hardy, who is the line editor for Rivers of London and an associate editor for Call of Cthulhu, and we talked about inter-party conflict. I wanted to ask Lynne about her perspective on the different kinds of inter-party conflict and what's the best way to include inter-party conflict in your game without things getting out of hand. I started by asking her to define exactly what it was. I'll jump over to that interview in just a moment, but first, please subscribe to the Chaosium YouTube channel, and thanks for watching.
Inter-party conflict can be any one of a number of things. So it could be disagreements between the characters about how to do something. Because, throughout the course of a game, your characters are going to have to make choices, and the characters might not agree with how to tackle something. The players might not agree how to tackle something. Still technically conflict, but relatively, hopefully, low level. But then you've also got more serious inter-party conflict where you've actually got one character actively working against all the other characters, maybe more than one character. But they're deliberately trying to subvert whatever's going on or get one over on the other characters for whatever reason.
And just to be clear, when we talk about inter-party conflict, we are talking about something that is deliberately done by players. This isn't there are people at your table fighting or who are grumpy with each other. This is an expanded part of role-playing.
It is, but you have to be careful because obviously it can then fall out into the players bickering. And I've seen it happen.
So jumping in early on then, why would you want inter-party conflict in your games? How does it enhance stories?
Well, if it's handled well and you have players that you can trust to do it, it can really further the story. Let's go to that lower level where you have characters disagreeing about how to tackle a particular problem that they've got to face. That can provide some really great role-playing opportunities, to flesh out their characters, explore their understanding of the world, their relationships to each other. So it can really enrich what's going on at the table and how those characters know each other, interact with each other, and how the story is furthered.
What's an example of a way that inter-party conflict could make a normal scene more exciting?
Well, it could be that you've got to, like you said, it's usually down to decision making. So you've got to make a decision. How are you going to deal with this NPC? Perhaps some of the group want to go over and confront them face to face about whatever it is they're up to. Some of the rest of the group want to go and do a bit more research or a bit more digging or spy on them or follow them. And it's a real case of, well, you've got to have that conversation. You've got to talk about what you're going to do. I mean, are you going to split the party and some of you go and follow that person for a bit while the others go and confront them? Are you going to go one way or the other? Or are you going to come up with some sort of compromise that wasn't what you thought of originally? And again, that's a great way of sort of like enhancing characters and the role playing because you're having to figure it all out. It's also quite interesting when you get something like an ethical dilemma, like particularly in Call of Cthulhu, it's like, well, are we going to have to do this terrible act to solve the problem? Or are we going to go another way around it? Is there another way around it we can go? And that can lead to all sorts of dramatic tension and really great role-playing opportunities.
Based on what I know about the various games that focus on inter-party conflict, it seems like there's a couple of main ways that it happens. You have games where the focus is trying to outshine each other, and you have games where the conflict is sort of enhancing a scene. Can you talk about the various different ways, point out any I haven't mentioned, or correct me in my interpretations of the ones that I did?
Well, we've talked about one, which is the one in most Call of Cthulhu games, is there's a decision to be made and you've got conflict as to how to resolve that. And the whole point of that is that you come to a resolution that hopefully doesn't end up with everything falling apart and the characters bickering at each other and never trusting each other again. I mean, that can, if it happens, lead to interesting role-playing opportunities. It can send the plot down in a different direction, but it's something that you have to be prepared for, and it can totally send things off in a way that you never, ever imagined. I've got an example of that from a live role-playing scenario I was in many, many moons ago. It was a Victorian live role playing. We'd gone to Whitby, so obviously vampires. What we didn't know was that many months beforehand, the refs had actually created a plant. Now, this is something we can talk about a bit more later. So all the player characters thought that this person was a genuine player character. She was the sister of one of the main characters who'd been there from the beginning, who was my character's best friend. His sister, the plant that we didn't know about, was also my friend. We go to Whitby. She'd literally been inserted months ahead of time so that when we got to Whitby, she could be turned into a vampire, because of course she was. And that caused real issues. And, you know, we were walking along, discussing it. There were the four of us. There was me, the brother, the sister, and another good friend. And we were discussing how we were going to deal with this situation, because she hadn't fed yet. So, you know, she hadn't completely turned. Was there a way we could resolve this? And all of a sudden, the brother whips out his sword from his sword cane and chops her head off as I'm standing next to her. And of course, that was kind of like, whoa! Because he loved his sister. He didn't want to condemn her to a half-life, or, you know, at best, or at worst, becoming this hideous creature that was going to go around murdering people. And he took matters into his own hands. And I mean, from a dramatic role-playing thing, that was absolutely immense. But the refs hadn't figured that that was going to happen, and it caused massive fallout. The brother went insane and ended up locked in an asylum, which led to even more creative role-playing opportunities. But it caused an absolute schism between all the other players, because half the group thought that he'd done absolutely terrible thing and it was unconscionable and could not be forgiven. And the other half of the group were like, yeah, probably shouldn't have done that, but we kind of understand why he did it. So, you know, it's one of these things that you have to be aware of consequences of any decision you set in front of a group of players and characters, in case things go south, big style, and have ways that you can deal with those. But then there's some other games, funny enough, having mentioned vampires, you know, like Vampire the Masquerade, where you're all from different coteries, you're all from different clans. Backstabbing is part of the game. And it's the fun part of the game, trying to get one over on the other characters, trying to gain that edge and that sense of superiority and supremacy. So it's again, it's one of these horses for courses things. In certain settings, the rules are there and they should help support that, and that tooling each other over is part of the fun. In other settings, while it can be helpful and it can be fun and it can be very entertaining, it's got to be handled with a little bit more care, just in case things go wrong. And at the end of the day, sometimes you just get players who want to kill everybody, who deliberately go out of their way to go after the other player characters for no genuine reason whatsoever. They may have an in-character excuse, which is not necessarily genuine or reasonable. And at that point, you just have to sit down and talk to them about why they're doing that and find out why they're doing this. And it may just be that they've got hold of the wrong end of the stick about what the game is about. It may just be that they're having a bad day and just kind of need to lash out and just get that frustration out. But at the end of the day, if it's something that they keep doing, you may have to have the difficult conversation that, I'm sorry, but we really don't want you at the table.
Can you give an example of what it looks like when you maybe aren't prepared enough and you have inter-party conflict that goes bad?
The only time I've encountered that personally was I was running a demonstration game for Cogs, Cakes and Sword Sticks years ago at a convention, and I ended up with 13 players for reasons we won't go into. I never ever want to have to GM for that number of people ever again. And two of the people who turned up literally turned up just so they could murder everybody else. They had no other intention. That was their stated thing very quickly after they created characters. Now, the wonderful thing there was that the other 11 players ganged up on them and just shut them down completely. So I really didn't have to do too much to keep that one under control. And sometimes you do just get people who are there to be destructive. I mean, hopefully if you're playing with a group of friends, you're not going to have that issue. This is probably going to be more of an issue at things like demonstration games. But again, you just have to sit them down, take them to one side and say, look, why are you doing this? This isn't the point of the game. Why are you deliberately making it unpleasant for other people?
So what are some general tips that you can apply to basically any type of interpersonal conflict to make sure that everybody is having fun, to make sure that the game is going to run smoothly, and to make sure that you're not going to run into any problems?
You can have safety mechanisms, obviously. So if things are going awry, if you've got gaming safety tools in there, that's an opportunity for everybody to go, stop, this is going somewhere I'm not happy with. Can we talk about this? That's at the most basic level. Going back a step, have session 0. Set expectations. What you're going to bring to the table, what you expect from your players in terms of behavior, what the premise of the game is, how interparty conflict is going to be handled, how you expect it to be handled. I mean, you could even, at the very sort of like extreme end, go for something like some of the Nordic LARP systems and bring those to your table, where you've got prearranged consent. So you might have to play characters who are siblings, so there might be a lot of in-character sibling bickering, and it's purely role-playing. But this is all agreed beforehand, so that people know what's going to happen. People don't take offense at it. It's part of those characters. You know, or you could have, or let's say 2 rivals, similar sort of things. So you've established beforehand that there's going to be rivalry, there's going to be sniping, they're going to be trying to outdo each other, but that's something that you've pre-agreed to. They may not necessarily know all the details of what they're going to get up to, but it's known and it's going to be managed so that it doesn't overshadow the rest of the game. I mean, really, if you're going to go completely for it, you could even go for the I'm going to kill your character at some point, but let's go away and have a quiet conversation about that so that we can do this as a big dramatic thing that either serves our plot arc or serves the actual genuine plot arc. And that kind of ties back again to the GM having someone there as a plant in the party.
I think that preparation and establishing consent checklists and everything like that is really, really critical in a lot of games. I want to raise a circumstance where that hasn't been done and talk about advice for that. And to be clear, I'm not saying that, you want to be in this situation, but if you're a GM who, maybe it's your first time running and you're not aware of some of these tools and you find yourself in a situation where a game is turning towards interpersonal conflict and you don't have anything pre-prepared, you don't have anything backed up, what are some immediate things you can do to try and make sure that cool heads will prevail?
Call a comfort break. If things are getting out of hand, call for a comfort break, go and pop the kettle on, make yourselves a cup of tea or coffee, get snacks, do what you need to do, decompress and chill, and talk about it out of character, away from the table. Hopefully that will help calm things down so that you can then go back to the table. If it doesn't, then you're probably just going to have to call it quits for that session and figure out a way to deal with that next time.
Do you have any advice for tables where some players are into interpersonal conflict and some players may not be? And I don't mean that in the sense of the party will clash, because I think we've kind of covered that. But do you have any suggestions about how to run a story where some parts of the group can be coming up against each other, but some parts of the group can still sort of have this safe, cohesive whole to exist in?
Again, I think that's down to discussion in your session 0. You find out who's up for it, who isn't up for it. You make sure that the people who aren't up for it are okay with it going on in some form. And you talk, you come to a compromise, you come to an agreement between everybody to make sure that everybody is comfortable and everybody is enjoying the game. And as the GM, basically what you have to then make sure is that the people who are having their inter-party conflict aren't overshadowing everything. They're not controlling everything. So you make sure that the people who are having their little cohesive whole are still getting their role-playing opportunities, they're still able to engage with the plot, and that the bickering that's going off over here isn't large enough scale to derail everything.
Let's dive into some Chaosium games a little deeper, and let's talk about Call of Cthulhu and Rivers of London specifically. What do you see as the role of inter-party conflict in those games?
Driving the story forwards. That's what it's there. It's for role-playing opportunities and driving the story forwards. Let's look at Scritch Scratch. That's the one that springs to mind immediately because you have 2 camps. You have the cleaners and you have the film crew. And over the years running it, there have quite often been clashes between the cleaners and the film crew as to what they want to happen, because they've got very different goals. And that usually works beautifully, because Scritch Scratch was primarily written A, in an emergency, but B, as a character piece. It's there for the players to explore the characters and do that whole interpersonal relationships conflict thing. And some of the player characters have got conflict, interpersonal conflict written into their backgrounds. So that's there from the off. And it is always amusing to see how people handle it.
You gave such an excellent example of a role-playing game that had interpersonal conflict where things went wrong, or not necessarily chaotically terribly, but not ideally.
Usually chaotically terribly, but to be fair.
Could you give us an example of it going fantastically right?
They will exist, but you see, the thing is, they don't tend to stand out quite as memorably as when they go horribly wrong. Because let's face it, we tend to remember the gloriously dramatic stuff rather than the, oh, well, there's a bit of conflict, but then it worked absolutely perfectly. There is one from Children of Fear. I can't really go into too much specifics about it because it's actually one of the major set pieces, and that would be hideous spoilers. So if you haven't played or GM'd Children of Fear yet, fingers in your ears time. Quite often it's when they get to the big ritual part way through. There is often conflict about what to do, particularly if people have figured out that they're being set up. And that can resolve gloriously, beautifully, in the way that it all plays out. So, you know, people have saved Tenzin Khalsang because they've realized what's going on. And they've done this heroic thing despite the fact that there's been these, well, should we do it? Shouldn't we do it? We've also had conflict at the very end with the other sacrifice, and how we deal with that. And again, it's quite often brought up really interesting, creative, dramatic finales that conflict as to how to resolve this really tricky moral question has driven forward.
If you could speak to somebody who has never run a game that focuses on interparty conflict and you want to pitch it to them in the best way, what would you say?
Interparty conflict is something that forms a staple of narrative fiction, and handled well, there is absolutely no reason why it can't work beautifully in role-playing games the same way it works in books and novels. It helps build drama, it helps build tension, and it gives some really superb opportunities for role-playing. So give it a go, see how it goes.
This has been a great conversation, and I think there's a lot of really useful information here. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to share?
I think on a final note, really what we have to say is that interparty conflict can work beautifully if you set expectations and your players play fair. Just be prepared for unexpected consequences, because players are players and they tend to do unexpected things.